Lando makes a shocking statement as the rivalry with Verstappen heats up. Red Bull warns rivals about 2026 engine development, and Antelli casts doubt on Mercedes' engine for Australia. Let's get into the latest F1 news. Lando Norris just said the quiet part out loud, and the internet absolutely lost its mind. So today, we're diving deep into one of Formula One's most painful and controversial moments in modern history, and why 4 years later, it still refuses to die. But first, let me set the scene for you. Picture this: a packed crowd at the Hammersmith Apollo in London. Lando Norris and McLaren CEO Zak Brown on stage, celebrating McLaren's incredible 2025 championship-winning season. The energy is electric. The fans are buzzing. And then Norris starts talking about Lewis Hamilton, his future teammate at Ferrari, his experience, his championships. He's building up to this big compliment, saying something like he hasn't won 7 world championships by just barely being good enough. And then the crowd does something that sent shockwaves across every Formula One fan community online. They shouted 8, and Norris, without hesitation, without flinching, without any political spin, just looked out at the crowd and said, "Should have been 8." 3 words. That's all it took to explode social media all over again. The clip circulated everywhere within hours, because those 3 words aren't just a throwaway comment from a driver at a fan event. Those 3 words represent something much deeper. They represent a wound in this sport that never properly healed. So let's go back. February 2026, we're still talking about December 2021. That alone tells you everything you need to know about how significant this moment was. The 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the final race of the season. Hamilton and Verstappen tied on points. Winner takes all. One of the greatest sporting showdowns in living memory. And for most of that race, Lewis Hamilton was doing exactly what he does. He was dominating. He was pulling away. He was in control. An 8th World Championship was within touching distance. History was about to be made. And then Nicholas Latifi crashed out. The safety car came out, and everything changed. Now here's where it gets genuinely complicated and where the controversy explodes. Race director Michael Masi made a decision that had never been made before in the history of Formula One. Instead of following the established safety car procedure, which would have either kept the lapped cars in place or allowed all of them to unlap themselves, he selectively allowed only the cars between Hamilton and Verstappen to unlap themselves. Just those specific cars, not all of them, just enough to clear the road for a 1-lap shootout. Verstappen had just pitted for fresh tires. Hamilton had not. So there's your scenario. New rubber versus old rubber, 1 lap to go, the title at stake. And of course, Max Verstappen went past Lewis Hamilton at turn 5 and won the championship. In isolation, the overtake itself was spectacular. Verstappen is a phenomenal racing driver, and nobody disputes that. But the manner in which the situation was constructed, the selective and unprecedented application of the rules in those final chaotic minutes, that is what has fueled this debate ever since. Toto Wolff, Hamilton's team principal at Mercedes at the time, told Masi directly that what was happening was not right. Hamilton himself described the race as having been manipulated. Mercedes filed protests. The Formula One world divided into camps that, 4 years later, are still entrenched. And Lando Norris was actually there. He was racing in that Grand Prix. So when he says the decision appeared to be made for television, that it was made to create a fight, you have to take that seriously. This isn't a fan speculating from their couch. This is a driver who was physically on the circuit when it happened, watching it unfold in real time. He admitted he didn't even know at first that only some cars were being waved through. And when he found out, he said he was surprised. Because everyone was surprised. Because it had never been done that way before. Now let's talk about why this moment. Norris's 3-word comment in February 2026 matters so much beyond just being another Abu Dhabi take. Because here's the fascinating layer to all of this. Lando Norris is not some bitter Mercedes loyalist with an axe to grind. This is a McLaren driver. A McLaren driver who just won the Constructors' Championship. He's not in Hamilton's corner for any political reason. He has absolutely nothing to gain from stirring this pot. which makes his comment land with even more weight. When someone with zero agenda says something, you listen differently, and there's more context to why this resonates right now in early 2026. Lewis Hamilton has made one of the most dramatic moves in Formula One history, switching to Ferrari. The sport is entering a brand new technical era with completely redesigned cars. As everyone is watching to see whether Hamilton can recapture the form that made him the most successful driver in the sport's history. Norris himself said at that event that he thinks it will be exciting to see Lewis back at the front, back fighting for wins, and that fans should expect to see more of that in 2026. So this isn't just about relitigating the past, it's about the fact that Hamilton is still here, still in the game, still chasing greatness, and the number 7 on his championship tally, when so many people believe it should read 8, adds this extraordinary tension and emotional weight to everything he does going forward. Think about the psychology of it for a moment. Most sporting debates fade with time. The controversies of the past become footnotes. But this one hasn't. 4 years on, I'm in a crowd of Formula One fans celebrating a completely different championship victory by a completely different team. The number 8 still gets shouted instinctively. It's in the collective memory of this fan base. It won't let go. And maybe it shouldn't let go. Not because the past needs to be endlessly relitigated or because anyone's title should be formally stripped or rewritten, but because sport is supposed to be about clarity. It's supposed to be about the best person winning under the same rules that apply to everyone. And when something happens that muddles that clarity, when something unprecedented and irregular occurs at the most critical moment of the most important race of the year, it deserves to be remembered. It deserves to be talked about. Hamilton himself has spoken about that night in Abu Dhabi with real emotion, comparing it to a first heartbreak that leaves a permanent scar. That is remarkably vulnerable language from someone who is generally incredibly composed and measured in public. It gives you a sense of just how deeply that evening cut. So where does this leave us? Verstappen is a 3-time world champion at this point in the story, and nobody can take that away from him. He is one of the most gifted drivers Formula One has ever produced. But the manner in which that first title was decided will always carry an asterisk in the minds of a huge portion of this sport's audience. And incidents like Norris's comment remind us that even within the paddock, even among Hamilton's fellow drivers, that feeling exists. The sport has moved on in many ways. Masi is no longer race director, or the FIA tightened up its safety car procedures following that controversy. New rules and new structures were put in place precisely to prevent something like Abu Dhabi 2021 from ever happening again, which in itself is an acknowledgement that something went wrong that day. And now, as Hamilton begins a new chapter at Ferrari, as the sport enters this fresh technical era, as a new generation of drivers, including Norris himself, pushes toward the front, the ghost of that final lap in Yas Marina still lingers in the background. Should have been 8. 3 words, but they carry the weight of an entire championship, an entire legacy, and an entire conversation that Formula One still hasn't fully resolved. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Hamilton was robbed? Should the result have been different? And if you want more deep dives into Formula One history and the moments that define this sport, make sure you subscribe because we have a lot more coming your way. What if I told you that one of Formula One's most exciting young drivers just dropped a word that could change everything about how the 2026 season kicks off? Because Kimi Antelli, the teenager Mercedes has trusted to replace the greatest driver the sport has ever seen, just said something that should have every F1 fan paying very close attention before the Australian Grand Prix. And if you think pre-season testing gave us the full picture of how this new era of Formula One is going to play out, you might want to stick around, because the most important challenge hasn't even happened yet. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we cover Formula One in a way that goes beyond the headlines, breaking down what's actually happening beneath the surface of the sport. And today we are diving deep into something that's been quietly building since the very last day of pre-season testing in Bahrain. So hit that subscribe button, because this season is shaping up to be one of the most technically fascinating in the history of Formula One, and you do not want to miss a single piece of it. Let's start with the big picture, because context matters here. The 2026 Formula One season has introduced completely redesigned power units, and one of the most significant changes is the way power is now split between the traditional internal combustion engine and the electrical systems. We're talking a genuine 50-50 division of power between those two elements. That is a massive shift from what we've seen before, and it fundamentally changes how drivers need to approach every single corner, every single straight, or every single lap. Now here's where things start to get really interesting. Albert Park in Melbourne, the venue for the season-opening Australian Grand Prix, is one of the fastest circuits on the entire Formula One calendar. Since the track was redesigned back in 2021, it's been absolutely flying. Cars are reaching incredible speeds, overtaking has increased, lap times have dropped, and the circuit has become a genuine spectacle. But that speed comes at a price, and that price is energy. Here's the tension that Antelli himself has identified. When you're flying around a high-speed circuit like Albert Park, you're not getting much opportunity to regenerate battery energy through braking. Think about it logically. Braking is how these hybrid systems recover energy and charge the battery. The harder and more frequently you brake, the more energy you're putting back into the system. But at Melbourne, there are long, flat-out sections where the cars are barely touching the brakes at all. There's a section from turn 7 through to turn 11, where drivers are essentially flat to the floor, barely lifting, and that creates a very specific and very demanding problem for the new power unit architecture. Antelli put it in his own words quite bluntly. He said the battery is going to experience quite a bit of a shock going from Bahrain to Melbourne. And when a driver with the backing of Mercedes, a team widely considered the favorites heading into this season, says something like that publicly, you have to take it seriously. This isn't a throwaway comment. This is a calculated acknowledgement of a genuine technical challenge. And here's what makes this even more layered. In Bahrain, teams had 6 full days of testing to understand how the new power units behave, how to optimize the deployment of electrical energy around the lap, and how to get the best out of the 50-50 power split. 6 days is a significant amount of track time. It gave engineers and drivers the opportunity to iterate, to experiment, to make mistakes and correct them, and to arrive at something approaching an optimal setup. Melbourne offers nothing of the sort. 3 practice sessions, and then you're straight into qualifying. That's it. You have to be correct from almost the moment you exit the pit lane for the very first time. This is why Antelli confirmed he's going to be putting in serious simulator hours between now and Melbourne. The sim work isn't just about learning the circuit. Every driver knows Albert Park well enough at this point. The specific challenge is understanding how to deploy the electrical power at exactly the right moments to maximize lap time without running the battery into a state where the car is suddenly delivering significantly less power at a critical moment. Get that deployment strategy wrong in qualifying, and you could be 2, 3, or even 4/10ths slower than your rivals through no mechanical fault of your own, purely because your energy management strategy wasn't dialed in correctly. Now, let's zoom out for a second and think about what this means for the championship picture, because this is where the emotional stakes really start to climb. Mercedes arrives in Australia as the team everyone is watching most closely. The W17 turned heads in testing. Rivals were impressed. Toto Wolff himself acknowledged that he was hoping certain teams would perform worse than they actually did. That's the kind of comment that tells you the competitive order is very much up for grabs. But what if the battery challenge at Melbourne creates an unexpected shuffling of the deck right at the very start of the season? Consider what that would mean for Antelli specifically. This is his debut season in Formula One. He's carrying enormous expectations after replacing a 7-time world champion. He's 18 years old and stepped straight into a race seat at arguably the most storied team in the modern era of the sport. Every single result this year is going to be scrutinized, analyzed, and debated. A strong start in Australia would silence some of the inevitable doubters. But a difficult weekend, particularly one where the technical demands of the new power unit expose any gaps in his preparation or experience, could set a narrative in motion that follows him for months. This is exactly why the simulator work matters so much. It's not just about technical preparation. It's about arriving at Albert Park with confidence. It's about standing on the grid for your very first Formula One race, knowing that you've done everything possible to understand what your car is going to do when you ask it for everything. Because in those 3 practice sessions, you can't afford to spend your time learning what everyone else already figured out in Bahrain. You need to hit the ground running and build on a baseline that was already established before you ever crossed the equator. There's also a broader story here about what the 2026 regulations mean for the competitive order across the whole field. Every team is dealing with this same battery challenge at Melbourne, but not every team has the same depth of simulator resources that Mercedes possesses. Not every team has the same caliber of engineering talent working through these problems in real time. And not every team will have prepared their drivers in the same way. This is where the performance gaps of the new era could start to reveal themselves, not necessarily through raw pace, but through smart energy deployment and preparation quality. The teams that nail the deployment strategy from free practice 1 onwards are going to have a significant advantage heading into qualifying and the race. The teams that are still figuring things out by Saturday afternoon are going to be giving away performance they cannot afford to give away, and in a season that could potentially be this close at the front, those margins are everything. What I find genuinely compelling about Antonelli's candid admission is what it tells us about his mindset. He didn't hide from the challenge or try to downplay it. He acknowledged it directly, explained what he was going to do about it, and made clear that the work was already underway. That is not the mentality of someone overwhelmed by the moment. That is a driver who understands the problem, respects the difficulty of it, and is already in problem-solving mode. And for a teenager in his debut season, that is actually a remarkable thing to observe. As we head toward Melbourne, here's what I want you to watch for when the season finally gets underway. Pay attention to which drivers and which teams look immediately comfortable with the energy deployment from the very first practice session. Pay attention to whether anyone appears to be struggling with their lap-to-lap consistency, because inconsistency is often the first visible symptom of an energy management strategy that hasn't been fully dialed in yet. And pay close attention to Antonelli specifically, because how he handles this first genuinely novel technical challenge of his Formula One career will tell us an enormous amount about who he is as a racing driver. The 2026 season is already one of the most anticipated in years. New regulations, new power units, new drivers, new battles are on door. And it's all starting at one of the most demanding venues on the calendar for this exact new technology. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you're subscribed because we're going to be covering every twist and turn of this season right here on the channel. Drop a comment below letting me know which team you think is going to navigate the Melbourne Challenge best, because I genuinely want to know what you think. See you in the next one. Can the youngest driver on the Formula One grid actually beat the greatest driver of his generation? That is the question every single F1 fan is asking right now, and the answer might surprise you. Because today we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating storylines heading into the 2026 Formula One season. A 21-year-old Frenchman stepping into what is being called the hardest job in motorsport, sitting alongside a 4-time world champion in one of the most dominant racing teams the sport has ever seen. This is the Isaac Hajar story, and trust me, you do not want to skip a single second of this. Let me paint the picture for you. Imagine being a rookie driver, and your very first race weekend in Melbourne ends with you crashing on the formation lap before the race even starts. You are sitting there by the side of the track, watching everyone drive past you, and you are in tears. That is how Isaac Hajar's Formula One journey began just 1 year ago. Fast forward to today, and that same driver is now lining up next to Max Verstappen as his official Red Bull Racing teammate for the 2026 season. The comeback arc on this kid is genuinely something else. But here is where it gets really interesting. This is not just a story about a young driver getting a big promotion. This is a story about whether the revolving door at Red Bull finally stops spinning. Because since Daniel Ricciardo left the team back in 2018, Verstappen has essentially been carrying Red Bull on his shoulders with a rotating cast of teammates who simply could not keep up. Think about that for a second. 8 years of Verstappen being the undisputed #1, with teammate after teammate cycling through that second seat. And now here comes Hajar, the man many believe might actually be different. So what makes Hajar special? Why do people think this particular driver has what it takes where so many others have failed? Well, let us start with what happened at the Dutch Grand Prix last year. The same driver who was crying by the side of the track in Melbourne somehow found himself standing on the podium at Zandvoort, right next to Verstappen himself. That is not a small thing. That is a statement. And the Red Bull hierarchy clearly noticed, because by the end of the season, they had already made the decision to move Hajar into that coveted second seat. Now, here is something really fascinating. After Liam Lawson was let go after just 2 race weekends and Yuki Tsunoda stepped in to finish the season, Red Bull had burned through 4 different Verstappen teammates in just 16 months. 4 drivers in 16 months. That is the kind of pressure cooker environment Hajar is walking into. And yet, he seems completely unfazed, maybe even excited, which tells you a lot about his mentality. Speaking of mentality, this is where Max Verstappen himself enters the conversation in a really compelling way. Because rather than being guarded or dismissive about his new teammate, Verstappen has actually been remarkably open about what Hajar needs to succeed. And his advice is pure Verstappen philosophy. He said that as a driver, you have to believe you can beat anyone. Full stop. No asterisks, no qualifiers. Just unshakable self-belief from day one. Verstappen even reflected on his own debut in Formula One and talked about how he walked into the sport thinking that if you gave him the right car, he would win the championship. That is the mindset. And here is the brilliant part. He acknowledged that mistakes will happen, especially early on, and that it is actually better to make those mistakes when you are not yet in a car that can fight for titles. Because the lessons sting less, but they stick just as hard. That is genuinely wise advice from someone who learned these things firsthand. And Hajar has already made some of those learning mistakes. The Melbourne formation lap crash was the opener. Then came a collision with Kimi Antonelli at the British Grand Prix. Some costly errors in Baku too. All part of the education, all absorbed. He even had a moment in the wet during a behind closed doors test with Red Bull in January this year. But what matters is what Hajar does with those lessons. And the trajectory so far suggests he is absorbing them well. Here is another layer to this story that people are not talking about enough. The 2026 season is not just a new chapter for Hajar. It is a massive reset for the entire Formula One grid. New engine regulations, new car specifications, and, for Red Bull specifically, a brand new Red Bull Ford power unit. That means nobody walks into Melbourne with a guaranteed advantage. The entire pecking order is up for grabs, and that actually works in Hajar's favor. Because instead of trying to master a car that Verstappen has already spent years optimizing, both drivers are starting the development journey together from a much more level baseline. Sergio Perez, who spent years in that second seat before his departure at the end of 2024, has actually said publicly that he thinks the 2026 regulations change everything for Hajar's prospects. When you consider that Perez knows better than anyone just how difficult that role alongside Verstappen truly is, his endorsement of Hajar's situation carries serious weight. And what does Verstappen himself think about Hajar as a person and a teammate? This is where it gets genuinely warm, which is not always something you associate with the clinical, almost robotic focus of the 4-time champion. Verstappen described Hajar as a very nice guy. He talked about how he has known him for a while through Red Bull's junior program. He said he is confident they will work well together. He even admitted that at this stage of his career, heading into his 12th season, he approaches testing from a much more relaxed perspective. He is not standing in the garage watching every single detail when Hajar is in the car. He is working at his own pace and trusting the process. There is something almost poetic about that, because it means Hajar has the space to find his own rhythm without the 4-time world champion breathing down his neck every single lap. That psychological freedom could be exactly what a young driver needs to truly unlock their potential. But let us not romanticize this too much. The reality is that beating Max Verstappen in an equal car is one of the hardest things anyone has ever attempted to do in the history of Formula One. The man is a generational talent who operates at a level that makes even former champions look ordinary in the same machinery. Hajar knows this. His team knows this. The whole paddock knows this. And yet, there is something about this particular pairing at this particular moment in Formula One history that feels genuinely different from all the previous teammate combinations that came before it. New regulations, new engine, new car, new era. If there was ever a window of opportunity for a young driver to close the gap on Verstappen, the 2026 season might just be it. So here is where we land. Isaac Hajar is walking into the hardest job in Formula One with his eyes wide open, a year of hard lessons already banked, and the explicit blessing and advice of the man he has to challenge. He has the self-belief that Verstappen says every driver needs. He has the backing of a team that clearly sees something special in him. And he is arriving at the perfect moment when the entire sport is hitting the reset button together. Will he beat Verstappen? Honestly, probably not in year one, but that is almost beside the point. The real question is whether Hajar can establish himself as a genuine force, build steadily, and eventually become the teammate that Verstappen has never truly had. If he can do that, Formula One just got a whole lot more interesting. And if you want to watch every twist and turn of this rivalry unfold through the 2026 season, make sure you subscribe right now because we are going to be covering every single moment as it happens. Formula One has always been the most demanding motorsport on the planet. But what if I told you that the drivers are now being asked to do something that goes completely against every racing instinct they have ever developed? Something so counterintuitive that even Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton have publicly pushed back against it? Welcome to Formula One in 2026, where going slower is sometimes the fastest way to win. Here is the thing that makes this season unlike anything we have seen before. The cars look incredible, the technology is mind-blowing, and the racing promises to be spectacular. But underneath all of that, there is a fundamental tension playing out right now between the raw, instinctive, flat-out driving that made these men legends and a new technical reality that demands something completely different from them. Today, we are going to break all of that down, understand why it matters, and figure out what it actually means for the championship battle ahead. Let us start with what changed. For 2026, Formula One introduced entirely new power unit regulations. The electrical side of these hybrid systems is now significantly more powerful than before, and that changes everything about how the cars need to be driven. We are not talking about small adjustments here. We are talking about a complete rethinking of how a driver approaches every single lap, every single corner, every single straight. To understand why, you need to understand energy harvesting. These new power units can generate enormous amounts of electrical energy, but they can only do that when the car is decelerating or under specific engine mapping conditions. The faster you want to deploy electrical power, the more you need to harvest first. And here is where it gets interesting. The most efficient way to harvest that energy is sometimes to actually lift off the throttle while you are on a straight, to downshift earlier than normal, and to use techniques that feel completely wrong to a racing driver. Imagine being paid to drive a Formula One car as fast as humanly possible, and being told that the fastest lap time sometimes requires you to not go flat out through a high-speed section. That is the reality these drivers are living with right now. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella was incredibly candid about this after the Bahrain pre-season testing concluded. He confirmed that yes, there are circuits where these unusual driving techniques are necessary to extract maximum lap time. He specifically mentioned Barcelona as a harvest-poor circuit, where drivers had to avoid being completely flat out at high speed in order to balance the energy equation and produce the fastest overall lap. Think about that for a second. Not flat out at high speed. In a Formula One qualifying lap, that is genuinely revolutionary and not in the way everybody expected. But here is the nuance that is really important to understand. Not every circuit is the same. Bahrain, where the bulk of pre-season testing happened, is actually what teams are calling a harvest-rich environment. There are plenty of braking zones, plenty of slow corners, plenty of opportunity to replenish the battery. In Bahrain, the cars can be driven in a relatively conventional way and still maintain energy balance. The lap times from testing actually showed the cars are only a few seconds off last year's pace after accounting for tire differences, which is remarkably close for an entirely new generation of machinery. But then you have circuits like Melbourne. Oscar Piastri, who knows the Albert Park circuit better than almost anyone on the grid given his Australian roots and his incredible home crowd support, was clear that Melbourne is going to be a completely different challenge. Melbourne has sequences of fast corners linked by straights where harvesting becomes extremely difficult. If you do not actively manage your energy through those sections, you will simply run out of electrical deployment when you need it most. Jeddah presents similar problems, and those two venues come up very early in the calendar. This is where it gets psychologically fascinating. Racing drivers spend their entire careers going back to karting as children, building the instinct to push harder, brake later, carry more speed. Every single reflex is trained toward maximum attack. Now they are being asked to rewire those instincts in real time, mid-session, mid-race, depending on what the circuit demands and what the energy situation requires. Verstappen and Hamilton, two of the greatest drivers in the sport's history, have both expressed that this approach feels like it goes against the spirit of racing. They are not wrong to feel that way. But here is the counterpoint from Stella that I think is actually quite compelling. Stella argues that these 2026 cars are in some ways more demanding than anything recent Formula One history has produced. The ground effect stability of the previous generation gave drivers enormous confidence through high-speed corners. The cars were planted, predictable, and rewarded commitment. The 2026 machinery slides considerably more, requires more physical input from the driver, and demands a level of car management that has not been seen for years. So while the energy harvesting techniques might feel counterintuitive, the actual act of driving these cars at the limit is, if anything, a greater physical and mental challenge than before. Now there is something genuinely exciting happening on the technical side that could change some of this dynamic. It is called superclipping. This is a technique where the engine mapping switches the car back into harvesting mode, even while the driver is still at full throttle. It does this by adjusting the ratio of power output between the internal combustion engine and the electrical motor, allowing the battery to recharge from the ICE during acceleration. Currently, this process is capped at 250 kilowatts, but McLaren experimented with pushing that limit to 350 kilowatts during the final day of Bahrain testing. The Formula One Commission is actively discussing whether to raise that cap once more real-world racing data is gathered in the opening rounds. If superclipping can be expanded and made more effective, it could reduce the need for those counterintuitive lift-and-coast moments that drivers find so uncomfortable. Instead of harvesting through driver inputs that sacrifice speed, the car would do more of that work automatically through the power unit management system. It would be a significant step toward giving the drivers back that flat-out attacking style, while still maintaining the energy balance the regulations require. Stella was measured but optimistic about this. He acknowledged that there are technical solutions available, that the balance between regulation requirements and driver freedom is something the sport can adjust, but that it is important not to overreact before seeing how things unfold across a wider variety of circuits. And that is genuinely the right approach. Two testing venues cannot tell you everything about a full 24-race season. What we do know heading into Melbourne and the first competitive laps of this new era is that we are watching something historically significant. Alex Albon has noted that there is still enormous untapped performance in these cars, that the testing results represent just a fraction of what teams will eventually extract. Piastri himself acknowledges that every driver is still on a steep learning curve, that the optimal strategies for each circuit have not yet been fully understood, and that the teams with the best data from early races will be able to leapfrog their rivals in understanding. This is the hidden championship within the championship. While everyone focuses on who has the fastest car and who can drive the hardest, there is an entirely separate competition happening in the data centers of every team on the grid. Who understands these energy systems best? Which engineers can build the most effective harvesting models? Which driver and engineer combination can translate that understanding into lap time most quickly? That battle will define the early part of this season, just as much as raw pace. And that brings us back to the question at the heart of all of this. Is Formula One in 2026 still the ultimate driving challenge? Stella is absolutely convinced it is. not despite the new demands, but because of them. The combination of cars that slide more, require greater physical involvement from the driver, and simultaneously demand a completely new kind of cognitive management creates a challenge that has no parallel anywhere in motorsport. The drivers who adapt fastest, who can simultaneously feel the car at its physical limit while computing the energy equation in real time, those are the drivers who will be standing on the podium when the checkered flag falls in Abu Dhabi. We are only at the beginning of understanding what this new era means. The first race will tell us more than months of testing ever could. Drop your prediction for who adapts quickest in the comments below, and make sure you are subscribed because we will be covering every development of this season as it unfolds. Formula One is entering its most dramatic technical revolution in over a decade, and the battle happening right now behind closed doors might already be deciding who wins the championship before a single race lap has been completed. Stick around, because what I'm about to break down changes everything you thought you knew about the 2026 season. So, here's the situation. We are days away from one of the most consequential deadlines in modern Formula One history. March the 1st, 2026. That is the date every power unit manufacturer must submit their engine designs to the FIA for official homologation approval. And once that door closes, it basically stays closed. What you bring to that table is largely what you're stuck with, and that reality is driving some fascinating conversations inside the paddock right now. But before we get into the full picture, let me explain exactly what homologation means for people who haven't followed the technical side of this sport too closely. When a manufacturer submits their power unit for homologation, the FIA goes through every single component, every specification, every performance parameter, and officially stamps it as legal and compliant with the 2026 regulations. After that approval, the ability to develop and upgrade your engine becomes incredibly restricted. You can't just wake up one morning and decide to bolt on 50 extra kilowatts because your rival showed up with a faster engine at round 3. The rules dictate specific windows in which you can introduce upgrades, and those windows are narrow. Now here's where things get genuinely interesting. Red Bull Powertrain's technical director Ben Hodgkinson has come out and said something that very few people in his position would normally say publicly. He wants to scrap homologation entirely. His words were essentially that he'd love a completely open, gloves-off fight between manufacturers. No homologation restrictions, just pure engineering competition deciding who comes out on top. And you know what? When you understand the context of why he's saying this, it actually makes perfect sense. The 2026 rules already include a budget cap for power unit manufacturers set at $190 million per year. On top of that, there are strict limitations on the hours manufacturers can run on their dynamometers for testing and development. Hodgkinson's argument is that if you already have a spending cap and testing restrictions keeping everyone honest, why do you also need homologation rules on top of that? In his view, the combination of those financial and operational limits already levels the playing field enough without locking down development opportunities as well. But the FIA and the rulemakers have a counter-argument built into these regulations. There's a system called Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities, or ADUO. And this is essentially a safety net designed to prevent any single manufacturer from completely running away with the advantage in year one and just never being caught. The way it works is that the FIA will continuously monitor and score the performance of every power unit throughout the season. If a manufacturer falls significantly behind the others, they get additional windows to introduce upgrades at shorter intervals than the normal regulatory schedule would allow. Hodgkinson acknowledged that the intent of ADUO makes sense in principle, but he raised a genuinely fascinating technical point about why catching up in power unit development is so much harder than catching up on the chassis side. Think about this. When an aerodynamicist comes up with a new wing concept or a suspension upgrade, they can design it, manufacture it, test it in a wind tunnel, and potentially get it on the car within a few weeks. The pipeline is relatively tight. With a power unit, the entire process is completely different. Hodgkinson mentioned that certain components can have a manufacturing lead time of 12 weeks alone. Then you need another similar stretch of time to run durability testing and prove the part actually survives the brutal conditions inside a Formula One engine. Then you need time to manufacture enough units for the entire race pool, because unlike a chassis where you have two cars, a power unit manufacturer is supplying engines to multiple teams and maintaining a pool of perhaps 12 or more units. Every single one of those needs the upgrade before you can confidently race with it. So if someone launches the season with a significant power unit advantage, Hodgkinson's point is that it could take many months before any competitor realistically closes that gap, regardless of what ADUO rules allow on paper. The rule might say you can introduce an upgrade after 6 races. But physically building and validating that upgrade in 6 race cycles is an enormous challenge. Now let's talk about Red Bull powertrains themselves, because this is where the story gets really compelling. 3 years ago, the site where their power unit factory now stands in Milton Keynes was literally just a field. This was a completely new operation built essentially from scratch. Yes, they recruited heavily from established manufacturers, with Hodgkinson himself coming from Mercedes high-performance powertrains along with several other highly regarded engineers. But taking experienced people and building a world-class power unit program in 3 years is still an extraordinary undertaking. What happened at pre-season testing in Barcelona genuinely surprised a large portion of the Formula One paddock. The Red Bull powertrain's engine showed levels of reliability and performance consistency that nobody was fully expecting from a brand new program. The team completed 100 laps on the very first day of testing, which Laurent Mekies, the new head of the Red Bull operation following Christian Horner's departure in mid-2025, called historical. Here's the fascinating dynamic in the paddock right now, though. Toto Wolff from Mercedes pointed to the RBPT unit as the benchmark going into the season, highlighting their apparent energy deployment and management levels as being beyond what Mercedes can currently match. Meanwhile, Mekies is pushing back on that narrative, insisting Red Bull knows there is a huge mountain still ahead of them and explicitly saying they are not the benchmark. He acknowledged there will be uncomfortable moments throughout the season, races where the gap to the competition becomes painfully clear. Whether that's genuine humility or strategic messaging designed to manage expectations and avoid pressure, you can judge for yourself. But the key takeaway is that regardless of which manufacturer currently has the edge, this homologation system means the opening advantage could have an outsized impact on the competitive order for months, potentially for years into this 5-year regulatory cycle. And this is really the deeper story underneath all the technical details. Formula One has entered a new era where the engine is again a potential differentiator in a way it hasn't been since the early turbo hybrid years. The chassis development game is never going away, and teams will find performance gains there throughout the season. But if your power unit partner starts the cycle ahead, that starting position matters in a fundamentally different way than a front-wing update that can be copied within races. Kimi Antonelli over at Mercedes has even warned that their battery system faces something of a shock when the competitive season really kicks off properly in Melbourne. These are the kinds of signals that suggest the first half of 2026 could be absolutely unpredictable as the reality of the new regulations bites every team differently. What makes Hodgkinson's call for a completely open development fight so fascinating is that it reveals something important about the current landscape. When a manufacturer is calling for fewer restrictions, it typically means they believe they can win in an unrestricted environment. His confidence in what Red Bull Powertrains has built is clearly very high, even if the public messaging from Mekies remains cautious. The homologation deadline on March the 1st is not just a bureaucratic milestone. It is effectively the starting gun for a development race that will play out across an entire 5-year regulatory era. The decisions made in those engine specifications, the compromises accepted, and the innovations pursued will shape championship battles all the way through the end of this decade. And right now, sitting here at the end of February 2026, we are in the final hours before those designs are locked in. If you want to understand why this season feels different from anything we've seen in years, it's because the technical foundations being laid right now are genuinely historic. Whether the homologation system proves to be the right way to govern this new era, Or whether someone like Hodgkinson is eventually proven correct that a more open fight would have served the sport better? We're about to find out. The 2026 season is going to be something special. Make sure you're subscribed because we're going to be breaking down every twist as it happens.